Okay, please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States
The
of
United States of
America,
America,
and to
to
the
the
republic
republic
for which it stands,
stands,
one
one
nation,
nation,
under
under
God,
under God,
indivisible,
indivisible,
with liberty
with liberty and justice for all.
for all.
All right, thank you very much. Tonight we have Board of Education with us to present the 450 and 460 accounts. I'd like to welcome Board Chair Melanie O'Brien and Superintendent Carver, and I see many of her administrators. Mrs. Jansky is here, many of the administrators are here. So I'll turn the floor over to Melanie O'Brien at this point. Melanie?
Thank you, Mr. Knickerbocker. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Loud and clear.
Yeah, great, thank you. And Dr. Carver, I think you're going to be, thank you, putting the presentation up. First of all, good evening, Mr. Knickerbocker, Mr. Manfreda, members of the Board of Selectmen and Board of Finance. I am presenting with Dr. Carver the proposed Board of Education budget for 2021 to 2022. The budget conveys the Bethel School District goals and needs for the coming year. Next. The mission of the Bethel Public Schools is to foster a culture of excellence and achievement accomplished through strong collaborative relationships and rigorous teaching and learning opportunities for all learners. Our graduates will be compassionate, skilled, and inquisitive individuals who take initiative in making positive contributions to society. As I said last year, and is clear in our mission statement, our mission applies to all children, not just the easy ones, to educate. Our children are whoever walked through the doors, the children that lag behind in reading or math, the children with language barriers to learning, the children with special education needs, with behavioral problems and social and emotional needs, and the children in poverty with their own unique challenges. These are our children to educate. The mission statement and strategic plan guide us. However, data drives us. And as you might expect, the COVID pandemic has had a major impact on teaching and learning, and its lasting effects have budget consequences for 2021, 2022, and beyond. Next. The focus of our budget is to maintain our current programs and services, support student academic development, including learning loss and achievement gaps, and student social and emotional well-being, particularly exacerbated by interruptions in the school year, and to maximize resources to meet district needs. And on that point, I want to state what may be obvious, but it's important nonetheless, because it relates to human capital, which comprises 85% of our budget. Our staff, Dr. Carver, the administrative team, school principals, teachers, paraprofessionals, aides, nurses, custodians, they've all been required to vastly alter the way that they do their jobs. There's been new and more technology, the introduction of PPE, repackaging lesson plans for distance, hybrid, and in-person models, being ever vigilant of health and safety protocols. Our staff are essential not only to the district, but to the town, as you will see in this presentation. Next.
Sorry.
It's okay. And we want to make a point that the budget presentation is, of course, about our operating budget for the next school year, but it's also, there are two parts to really where the funding comes from and of necessity is required. We have the operating budget, which is, of course, the local funding from the taxpayers to maintain our curricular programs and to address our technology needs. But for the grants that we are getting, ESSR 1 and ESSR 2, our operating budget proposal would be appreciably higher. Our grants are able to address some of the needs particularly having to do with some of the COVID impacts, such as academic and learning loss, social and emotional well-being, parental engagement, technology, mitigation strategies. So we just want to make it clear that we're going to be talking about both of these funding sources and talking about how the needs of the district will be met through them. Next.
So I think this
Dr.
is where,
Carver.
yeah, this is where I jump in. And I do want to also emphasize and really give a big shout out to our teaching staff and our administrators, everybody from our custodians, our food service workers, because they have done a yeoman's job in terms of addressing the COVID pandemic. You know, we've transformed how we do education across the state, across the country, and did it in a very short order. And if it wasn't for the dedication of all of those involved, I don't think we would be where we are today. And so I just want to give them a big shout out and really recognize all their hard work and effort. I want to also start, before we kind of get into the nuts and bolts of the budget, talk a little bit about our current and projected enrollments, including some demographic updates. And we use this information because it greatly assists us in our budget planning as we think about our needs going through the past couple of years. As you know, we actually commissioned 2 separate enrollment studies done by Maloney McBroom as part of the school renovation projects. The first one was done in 2013, and we knew that at the time it was grossly underrepresenting really where enrollment was trending. And so we repeated it in 2016, and you can see that we are projecting at least almost a couple hundred students above where they initially placed us. We had a little dip in 2021, and we'll get into why we think that was, but we are projecting to be a little over 3,100 students next year. When we did the enrollment report, which is based October 1st, we were at 3,097. When I ran it as of mid-January, we were up over 3,100 students. So why do we think our enrollment dipped a little bit? I think it's a combination of factors, and those factors could influence potential enrollment next year. The first factor that we noticed right away was that our kindergarten enrollment this year was extremely low. And anecdotally, and we're actually surveying our parents now who are in the process of registering for next year, many people said to us, especially those with fall birthdays, that they were actually waiting a year because they knew that the COVID impact on their children's kindergarten year could be substantial, so that caused them to wait. The second impact on the enrollment that we saw this year was we actually had even though we were offering distance learning, we had a greater number of students who actually switched to be homeschooled. And, you know, when I spoke to several of the parents who were kind of trying to decide whether or not they should be in distance learning or homeschooling. And a lot of it had to do with the schedule that we had for our synchronous learning. And they just chose that as a better option for their families and their work schedules. We did survey parents to see whether or not the switch was going to be temporary. And when we did the survey, which was actually done in January, not everybody responded, but the initial data looks like many of those families will be coming back. So really, if 15 were homeschooling before COVID and now we have 48, that's about 33 children that could potentially be coming back into our school system next year. And then the third major reason, and I'm actually happy about this because they really needed the enrollment, is there was a small group of students who went to St. Mary's because they offered more in-person learning and that they felt that was a better option for their family. So those are some of those things that we think might impact it. So what does this look like? So what our biggest unknown going into next year is going to be our kindergarten class. Because we had such a low kindergarten class this year, we are projecting that that's probably going to trend higher into next year. What we're currently thinking is that that we may need to place another kindergarten teacher in if the enrollment gets too high, because if we stay with our 5 sections, but if we did that, we would do that through the grant funding as a result of COVID. So the areas that are highlighted in purple are the real key areas where you're seeing that there might be increased trend data because some parents chose to keep their children home for another year. The other, I guess, anomaly that we've been talking about, I think, for as long as I've been in Bethel, is that we have this bubble class that's moving through our system. And you're going to notice that when you look at what is going to be next year, the 3rd grade class, compared to the 5th grade class, they're substantially different in numbers. So in reviewing the data and trying to make an emphasis in keeping our class size at a very manageable amount, what we are going to do next year is we got some ESSER 1 funding. It used to be called CARES, but now it's called ESSER 1 funding that was over a 2-year period. And it looks like we can keep that to maintain 10 sections in the 5th grade at Johnson School. But because our current 3rd grade class is small, what we're going to do is move 1 3rd grade section to 4th grade to make sure that both our 3rd grade class and our 4th grade classes are a smaller class size. So all of this can be done either by leveraging our grant funding and or using our existing staff to meet the needs of the enrollment needs. And here's where you see, I apologize, my little box is off, but here's where you start to see a big shift in the numbers. When I showed you that in the 3rd grade section, we had 184 students, you'll note that in the 8th grade section for next year, there's 274 students. So again, that year-to-year fluctuation is pretty substantial. And really what the big impact to that is not, we don't need any additional personnel, but we are going to have to keep what we call our split cluster another year at Bethel Middle School to deal with these larger class sizes of 240, 274. But if you look at the variance, there will be a slightly lower number at the middle school for next year. But at the high school, you're going to see that huge current 8th grade class going into 9th grade class. Again, you have classes that range from 184 to 294. So we're constantly evaluating and making adjustments and moving our staff to address those needs. But one thing that I will say is that if you go back and look at the enrollment starting what is our current 2nd grade class going into 3rd, you do start to see a smaller trend in class size. And so the long-term impact of these big classes, unless it substantially changes, probably won't go on forever and ever. Mrs. O'Brien?
Yes. And free and reduced lunch. As you can see, the column, the chart is trending upward in the graph. So we are up roughly, looks like 25 students year over year, October 1 over October 1. So that's a trend that continues to increase, perhaps not surprisingly, given the pandemic.
Right. And so, but unlike the free and reduced lunch, our English learners actually dropped slightly. So last year on October 1st, we were looking at 200 and about 25, and it's gone down to 182. So why is this happening? One of the reasons that we think it's happening is that we have a normal exiting of students process. So once they acquire language and they meet certain types of proficiencies and assessments by state standards, we actually exit those students out of our English language services. So that happens every year. And I have to really give kudos to my staff because they're part of the reason that we're so successful. But the other big thing that we think influenced our English learners enrollments for this year is because of COVID. What we saw is that because a lot of international travel and international restrictions were put into place, We saw less immigration to the US and to Bethel, I should say, which probably is one of the reasons that it affected our numbers. So in the past, where we're seeing growing enrollments and we were expressing some concerns and needs, and we've had to add staff, this year we are not mandated to add staff because we don't necessarily meet the total number of 20 in a single building with one language. And so next year Johnson will be the biggest school, but we will reallocate our certified staff to Johnson from where that person currently is, mostly at Berry and Rockwell, although I think they do some services at Johnson also. And we continue to meet the needs of our high school students with our certified staff there. So that's kind of the normal shift. Our special ed, I'm having trouble, I'm sorry. Can you see the presentation still? Anybody?
Yes.
Thank you. Yes, there we go. I'm sorry, I must have clicked on something. So in terms of our students, our special education students, again, I want to praise Dr. Sapala and our PPS and special ed staff. We continue to keep our out of district placements low. We're typically around 17, we're up to 18 students, but that is because they have developed quality programs in district to meet our students' needs. And so that's something to be really proud of as a district. Oftentimes when you hear about cost overruns, it's around special education, where one student can cost $150,000. Again, we believe that's because we provide quality education services to our students with disabilities. But in terms of the percentage, it's not our percentage, but our numbers have increased. So when I started in Bethel, it was 2014, but it was about the same. We had 332 students. Now we're up to 420 students, and we expect that number will be slightly higher by the end of the school year. And our percentage has also increased slightly, but it's still far less than what it is at the state level in terms of the overall population of students with disabilities. Mrs. O'Brien?
Okay. And now on to the 2020-2021 focus. So what have you been focusing on this last year? First of all, it's much harder on administrators and staff to keep schools open than to have distance learning, but it's the right thing to do for kids. So when you have student staff in school, you have to worry about all the health and safety precautions, the protocols, the PPE, the testing of kids, and determining, help me with the term, Christine.
Contact tracing.
Contact tracing. And all those things around that, in addition to teaching and learning. Also implementing extensive mitigation. So if you've been in the schools, you know that there's plexiglass on the desks, and there labels telling you where to be, and for separation purposes, and mask wearing, and frequent hand washing, all of the things in addition to, of course, teaching the curriculum. And speaking of curriculum, where you used to have all of your children in front of you at desks and had in-person, we have been going from distance learning to hybrid to in-person, but even in-person learning means that there are a number of kids that are going to be at home learning virtually. If it's their choice or for other circumstances, that's what they're doing. So this is a lot going on in the schools, and also giving support to the families and staff, the resources that they need to implement any learning model. So that meant the distribution of the Chromebooks and access to Wi-Fi and the kinds of things that families have needed to be able to access learning. Next. And it's been a really busy year. There have much of this brought on by COVID, but things that we had going on anyway because we're a busy district. So we've had the school renovation projects, and we've had the accreditation process for the high school, which is a very involved process, involves a lot of the staff and administration at the high school. and ensuring digital access to all families, implementing the learning models, and support of public health, so contact tracing, and more recently the vaccination clinics, which are being held at the athletic field house at the high school, with many of our staff members helping to facilitate those clinics, and then community feeding projects, so that breakfast and lunch can be supplied to anyone who needs it, to be sure that kids are being fed. Next. And so what are we concerned about for our kids as a result of the pandemic? So again, these same themes, the academic, the changes in all the teaching models, the environment that they're in, this has caused achievement loss and gaps in our kids, and social and emotional concerns we have. But isolation, social isolation has caused more anxiety in our children, and disengagement. It's hard to stay engaged under these circumstances, and especially for our kids that are still distance learning or in a hybrid situation or go in and out of those models. They have really, COVID fatigue. It's just hard to keep that enthusiasm. And I think it first started as a grand adventure, at least for the young people I know, but that wore off pretty quickly. And it's just hard to keep it up. And so we have serious disengagement problems with some grades in particular. So that is very concerning. How do we get those kids engaged? We, of course, want to get them back into the classroom as quickly as possible. Next. And again, so moving forward beyond, through and then beyond the pandemic, programs to assist children, whether they're before or after school programs, academic acceleration to address learning needs in whatever way we find that works for whatever population that needs it, to support social and emotional well-being. And because we know that kids really don't learn if they're anxious and they're depressed and they're distracted. And also the funding to support this work is huge. It is very concerning, I can tell you, to staff and parents to see some of the learning loss, and very concerning to know how we get back. And we really can't move the district forward until we go back and assess where we are with the children, what their needs are, and what we can do about it, and work on programs for each of our subgroups to help them and bring them up to where they need to be for to be appropriate to their level in school, to their grade level in school.
So Melanie said at the very beginning of the presentation, we really want to chunk this into two pieces. And I'm going to walk you through a couple of slides here and talk about the differences between the leveraging of those grants, those ESSER funds that we received through the federal stimulus dollars that came as COVID relief package, COVID relief to states, and then was subsequently a proportion was given to the town of Bethel or to the school system, and versus our operational budgets. Because really the operational budget we're presenting tonight is really, as we said at the beginning of the presentation, really to maintain our current programs, the curricular and extracurricular programs that we already have in our existing districts, because we recognize that not only are we seeing a loss, but there's an economic impact to families who may be struggling right now. So how can we leverage those grant funds in the way that will really be based on data and meet our students' academic needs and social emotional needs, so that we can accelerate that their learning, so that they are on grade level and that they do become reconnected to school, and that we can work on their social emotional well-being. So I'm going to walk you through what we call the ESSER 1 and ESSER 2 grants, and really how we plan to spend those funds so that we can address needs. because we probably won't realize the full impact of both academically and social emotional until the fall of 2021. Even though we've tried to provide some formalized assessment data of our students, we have done some. We did our PSAT, SAT at the beginning of this in October. We were able to do some grade levels with NWEA, which is a math and literacy assessment that we use twice a year to assess where kids are. And then just looking at student work and teams meeting and expressing concerns about students. Because we don't have any consistent data since the fall of 2019, when I say data, I mean what we call big data or standardized data to really kind of look at bigger trends across the school system. We really think, even though we likely will have to give state testing in the fall and the spring, which I'm completely opposed to, we could talk about it another time. But even if we have to give state testing in the spring, it's likely until next fall, we won't know for sure where we're going to be. And I also have to acknowledge out loud, and the governor did today in his press conference, even as we go into fall, we are not going to be back to normal. We know that with the current health crisis, even though things are a lot better than they were even a month ago, that because the vaccination process for children won't even probably begin until August or September, it's likely that we're going to have to maintain some of these strategies going into the fall of the next school year. So we're kind of on a parallel track with trying to, yes, it'll probably be a lot better in terms of dealing with COVID, but how can we start to accelerate for that learning loss? So we're going to talk about several things, some academic acceleration and interventions, particularly focused on mathematics. We are also going to address special ed and some special ed needs that we know that we're going to have going into next school year. Again, address some social emotional impact, technology, and mitigation strategies. So these are all the ways. We haven't actually formally written the grant yet. It's going to be due, I think, sometime in March. Again, that grant has to be focused on COVID, any impact related to COVID. But these are the main themes that we're going to be looking at when we do write the grant for the coming school year. So we're going to start with academic impacts. And I'm going to lead us off, and then Melanie's going to pick up. So, as one of the big themes that we've seen in general is that, and what we've seen in Bethel is very consistent with what we've seen across the state and what we've seen across the country. In general, I think I've been crystal clear that my priority's always been, if we can provide in-person learning, we think it's the best for our children, as long as we can do it safely for our staff and our students. And so we see a direct correlation between the amount of in-person learning and academic achievement. But we're also seeing that students in higher grade levels also are more nimble and adept in going in between learning environments. So our high school students, well, they may be having trouble with engagement, particularly academic engagement in terms of grades. Their ability to kind of function online in a hybrid situation or a distance learning model is they're much more adept at that. And so we don't see necessarily, like in our PSAT and SAT data, as significant as of gaps as we have with our younger students who have more of an impact. And the other big theme that we saw, although Melanie will go through both literacy and mathematics, we definitely saw a much more bigger impact in the area of mathematics. Again, that is a trend that we're seeing in Bethel, across the state and across the country, more so than literacy. And the big reason that we think mathematics is more impacted is that, not to get into the weeds, but I'll try to do this really globally, in literacy and ELA, the curriculum standards spiral. So you'll see the same standards at different grade levels, but with increasingly complex tasks and more support that's needed. Whereas the mathematics curriculum build on previous knowledge. And so just by changing our learning model and going to fully distance learning, to hybrid, to remote, that it's the ability to teach to all those standards is really almost impossible. And then we can't teach in the same way. So we can't sit with a group of students in the way we have in the past. and working on individual reading skills. And we're trying to do things, and I would say my team is doing a yeoman's job at trying to make it as normal as possible. But it's definitely different than it has been in the past. So what we're seeing is, so the big themes is that we're seeing much more impact in mathematics, and those schools that have had more disruptions in their learning model, and I think Johnson and the middle school specifically, where they've had it more in and out, that you see that the data is a little bit different at those grade levels. Melanie?
Sure. And I'm going to start with strategies to address impacts. And these, of course, are the impacts on academic and social emotional impacts because of the interruptions in the school year. So the objectives would be to focus on acceleration of regular academic curriculum. And there had to be modifications in the curriculum during certain teaching models, because it became evident that kids couldn't sit and concentrate at home and in front of a computer the same way that they could in the same periods of time as they could at school. So the curriculum has been modified, and so we're going to want to try to get back to where these kids need to be. However, we can do that works that's age appropriate and grade level appropriate. And we're looking to have additional support for students who need acceleration and intervention. So once we can assess the needs of the kids, to cater programs to them to help them get to where they need to be. And of course, to leverage grant funding to do that. These grants, which we'll hear more about, but therefore they can be used for up to 2 years. We believe these problems are going to be with us for the next couple of years. Summer and before and after school programs will also help to accelerate students by providing some support throughout the school year and throughout the school day. And we are very mindful that we have to increase math intervention. Next, please. And this is where we were pre-pandemic in terms of literacy and math and assessments of children in both these areas. 323 students in the district had met the criteria to receive literacy intervention. 74% of our students were receiving those intervention services. That left 26% of our students who didn't. In math, 664 students in the district met the criteria to receive intervention. 59% of it received it, leaving 41% of our children not being served. Next. Now we're trying to give you an idea of where we are at this point during the pandemic in terms of literacy and math. However, our assessments aren't complete because not all grades have been able to be assessed at this point. So we're not complete here. We don't have grades K or 6 through 8, so all of our middle school. So we just use last year's numbers. So these aren't truly reflective of the entire student population, but it is an indication. Now we have 460 students in the district that meet the criteria to receive intervention in literacy. That's up by 137. We have 808 students in the district meeting their criteria to receive math intervention. That's up by 144 students over the numbers that you just saw pre-pandemic. So that's very, very concerning. We're going in the wrong direction.
And part of what we knew last year and what we continue to need this year, and part of one of the ways that we're going to leverage our grant funds is to increase the amount of math intervention. And specifically, if you look at the red boxes, it kind of paints the picture. So you have an overview of how we provide intervention both in literacy and mathematics across the district, both in 2021 and 21-22 is what we're proposing. And through the grant funding, what we're going to do is increase our math interventionist to increase it to 2 full-time FTEs at Johnson School. And by doing that, it also helps Berry and Rockwell schools. I should have put a box around Rockwell too, because it will help both of those schools. It's because right now they share a math interventionist, so it would provide a full-time support to provide that intervention. Again, this is a 2-year grant. So that leveraged with some other programs like Melanie talked about, summer programs, before and after school programs, additional support throughout the day at all of our schools. We'll be using that to make sure not only that we're reaching the kids that need intervention, but those kids that need to be accelerated so that they're back onto grade level curriculum. And there's a very, very different kind of mindset and philosophy around that. We are really promoting acceleration, which is, again, I call them cuspy kids. Dr. Brooks gets mad at me, but those kids that may have been at goal but have fallen a little bit behind goal. So we want to make sure that we're accelerating them back to so that they are successful in the regular education curriculum. So those are all really important. The second thing that we're going to use some of the grant funding for is to support our special education, specifically to add an additional special education teacher to Bethel Middle School. And, as we kind of reflect back during the pandemic and kind of where we've been, what we're really proud of is that we were one of the only schools that offered in-person extended school year services last summer. I think a lot of districts were leery about entering it and having the mitigation strategies, but it actually provided a good test for us because not only were we able to do it successfully, but we were able to work with some of our students with more moderate to severe disabilities into getting used to some of those mitigation strategies, which that they're more successful with now. We also have been able to, we created an AB cohort early on, which meant our students with moderate severe disabilities got more in-person time. In fact, they came 4 to 5 days a week when other students were only on hybrid. We also worked with our parents to develop implementation plans based on the learning model so that they knew what they could expect, again, with that goal of being full-time in person. And a lot of our students met their goals and objectives because we continued to provide a range of services. And because our staff became so adept at building their own capacity to use that technology as part of that delivery services. But what we know and what our needs are is what was pretty clear, or it is to me, and I think to Dr. Sapala and our team, is that distance learning for kids with moderate to severe disabilities was not very effective. And so as much as we can do everything we can to get those children in person 5 days a week, we will do so that we ensure that we're continuing to meet their goals and objectives. But in general, our caseloads were high because of increasing enrollment. And we've also seen, not surprisingly, that we've seen an increase in referrals to special education. And that was pre-pandemic and during the pandemic, to assess whether or not it's a true disability or that there was some type of gap in instruction that was contributing to students not being on grade level. The next thing that we know that we need, which is going to kind of lead us to that next piece, is that our literacy instruction to meet the goals and objectives on IEPs or individualized education plans, particularly at the middle school, needed to be enhanced because of the way our learning models are set up. We've had to support students in a variety of different learning models. And at this point, a lot of parents are actually wanting their kids to come back to school full time. So not only are we trying to meet the needs of the kids at home, the students that we have in front of us with disabilities, but we're also dealing with kids that have been out of school literally for almost a year. And so as those children reintegrate into school, it's became another additional stressor on our teachers, in terms of getting them back into a very structured environment, which some weren't used to. And so again, what we're looking to do with the ESSER funds is add a special education teacher. Again, this is a 2-year grant. And at that point, we will reassess where we are with our students on IEPs. there's just some data there, a lot of which I've mentioned, that, our students, our special education teachers have pretty big caseloads, between 15 and 16 students. But we also, as I said, we also need some specific expertise in there for our students with disabilities and explicit instruction in providing decoding skills and literacy support to our students to meet those goals and objectives. So that's I'm not going to read the whole slide to you, but that summarizes the purpose of why we think we need to add that position. And a lot of it is because of COVID. So Melanie?
Sure, thanks. And social and emotional well-being, again, this is an area, it's complicated. The causes for a child to have anxiety, to be depressed. We do know that for some kids, distance learning has been okay. They've done well with independence. They've almost thrived, and some have thrived, and others that really need that classroom teacher and have seen a sharp decline in grades, and that may cause great anxiety and depression, concern about their future and what's going to happen in school and with their grades and maybe what they had planned for the future. So a lot going on there. Let's just go on to the next slide. Thank you. So we strongly need, we need probably more than one, but at this point, we really need an SEL coach. And this will address all students' needs and help shore up capacity, tier 1 capacity of our classroom teachers. And we're recognizing some really disturbing numbers. 32.5% of students at BMS and 10% at BHS have received a counseling intervention this year. 209 students currently identified by student assistance team at BHS, or 22% of the population at BHS. Crisis intervention as of 2/1/21, so February 1 of this year, BHS with 12 incidents, BMS 20, and Johnson with 6. And also that we had our developmental asset survey in 2019, which brought us data concerning kids experiencing depression and having reported that they attempted suicide. So, just a lot going on with our kids, and our classroom teachers need support. They need a curriculum developed to help address what we're seeing in our classes, in our kids. Also, that there are frequent behavioral interventions even at the elementary school. So really throughout the district, signs that there are stresses and that kids have socially and emotionally.
And this data is just our Gaggle data. And just to remind folks what Gaggle is our software program that anytime a student does anything in an email, on any type of Google Doc, Google Slides, any type of Google platform, if they put any information on there that is problematic in terms of, it could be anything from profanity to much more serious things like suicide or suicidal ideation, threats, all of those pieces. So when you look at the data, and I believe we showed this to the Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance last year of the 1920 data, and we had a heightened concern about some of the social emotional impacts our students were experiencing. And this just shows you that we're on par with where we were last year. And if you look at the data, like this last chart is, since the beginning of the school year, our staff has had to address 21 incidences of suicidal ideation or self-harm. And then there's other charts that go into other areas. Again, it just kind of provides more data as to why we think there's going to be a big social emotional impact when our students do come back full time, just readjusting. So what would this SEL coach do? And again, we're talking about this through the grant funding. We broke it up into a 2-year cycle. And what we know we need to do is we really need to identify and implement a social emotional learning curriculum pre-K-12. And we're in the process of doing that now. But once that's identified, we need to write the curriculum and facilitate professional learning and work with teachers so that in year one, so that they understand that curriculum at deep levels. And then also select and implement some type of evaluation tools so that we can monitor whether or not what we're doing is successful. And then in the second year, really modeling that support for SEL strategies in our classrooms, making sure that we have the systems to identify students and provide appropriate supports for them. And the biggest theme in here is to support our teachers and our teaching staff, so that if they have an issue with a child in a class, they can come together as a team and problem solve and try to develop those replacement behaviors and skills that we think our students need to be successful in that. And then not only it helped to implement the curriculum in the classroom and be a support to those classroom teachers, but looking at that data to make recommendations for the schools and the districts, and then develop strategies to address those specific needs. We do believe that that even though we're implementing this pre-K-12, that our focus is mostly going to be at the secondary level, as probably with a little bit at Johnson, because we see that those social emotional needs, as you would expect, get amplified as kids get to that level. So the other thing I wanted to mention is just some technology and mitigation strategies that we know that we're going to have to do, and we're going to use this grant funding for. So first of all, we are likely going to have buy more PPE next year. I mean, I can't imagine a scenario that we aren't all going to be wearing masks in the fall, and implementing some of those other mitigation strategies. We know that we're going to have some software and hardware needs. I am hoping that we do not have to offer an option of distance learning, mostly because of the impact it has on my teaching staff, to try to be able to not only manage the students that are in front of them, but the students that are at home. But the governor said tonight on his press conference that that could be a possibility for the fall. Again, I'm hoping that doesn't happen. But the other thing is enhanced cleaning and other mitigation strategies, like the desk shields, like the making sure that we're 6 feet apart in all locations, and making sure that all of the regular cleaning is occurring on a regular basis. So we are going to leverage part of this grant money to support all of those things, as we did this school year. But I do want to take a second to talk about some technology needs, which are reflected in the operational budgets, and it really has to do with staffing. If you look, when I started in this district in 2014, we were only 1-to-1 in 12th grade, and now we are 1-to-1 in pre-K through 12th grade. But the staffing levels have not changed once during that time. So when at the beginning of that time frame, the staff was managing about 1,254 student devices. Those were computer labs, the 12th grade, and about 496 teacher devices, or staff devices, I should say. Now they have over 3,690 staff devices, because we have to make those devices available to all of our employees, because at any moment we might go on remote. So our ESL tutors, our paraeducators, all of those different groups that maybe would have used the technology that was available in the classroom, now we have to ensure that they have their own technology to be able to implement the various learning models. So you can see that the impact of them that has been exponential. So if you look at it in 2006 and 2007, we were about, with the same number of staff, we were about 400-to-1 for staff to device ratios. I'm sorry, device to staff ratios. In 2021, we are 2,025-to-1. And not only are they managing all of those devices, so they're managing the staff needs, the students who are in-person learners, but we also had to develop systems that if our parents had difficulty at home, that they could bring their technology back, that they could troubleshoot it and get it back out to them. So they're also managing it in those multiple learning environments. And lastly, they've had to manage an exponential growth in terms of platforms and services, where we were, running Windows and operating systems. We've gotten so sophisticated in how we've had to provide technology, because, some of it we were doing anyways, but now everyone is using it. And with that, everyone has a problem at any given point, including our families at home, as we would expect. So again, they're managing a lot more programs than they were in the past. So we think it's critical. So Melanie is going to talk about ECS.
Yes. So on to revenue and expenditures. So this chart just tells us basically that our funding, our level of funding is going to be the same as it was last year and as we expected it would be this year. So no change in the projected ECS grant to the town of Bethel. Next.
Sorry. Oh, Lord.
It's okay.
Here we go.
Also flat is the excess cost grant. And that is still at 70.9. You know this is supposed to be 100% funded by statute, but it hasn't been in some time. So it's going to be at the level that it was the prior year, 70.9. So that would be flat.
And this chart, we actually don't, we always give the Board of Finance and Board of Selectmen, these are the grants that we get before the district and usually have it in your budget book. But I did want to highlight the COVID grants. And so this year we received what's called the ESSER 1, and that's in the purple. So we received the ESSER 1, which is a 2-year grant spanning from 2020 to 2022. And then we also had what's called the COVID Relief Fund. And that was in the amount of $563,256. For the COVID relief grant has already been expended. And the Board of Finance, and I know our first selectman is well aware of some of the things that we've done with making sure our schools were ready for in-person learning, PPE, mitigation strategies, even our ventilation systems, making sure they were up to par. And then our ESSER Grant 1, we used this year to lower class size at Johnson School specifically so we could spread out students. And I mentioned in a previous slide that we are going to use part of this ESSER 1 grant to continue that lowering of class size at Johnson School into next school year, just one of the 2 positions. And this is the grant that we just received. I didn't know what the amount was going to be when I did my superintendent's presentation on this, when I talked about using grant funds. But we did receive a little over $1 million, and that's what we're going to be targeting for the academic acceleration and social emotional pieces so that we can really target and address our students' needs to get them back on par. So I also wanted to take a minute to talk about per pupil expenditures. Because I think there's a lot of misconceptions about this. So Bethel currently right now, our per pupil expenditure as defined by the State Department of Education, and they're always a year or 2 behind in their calculations. And it's really because it's based on a report that Mrs. Yansky and her team does from our office. It used to be called the ED001, but now it's called the EFS, and Terry will tell us later what that EFS means. But when you look at per pupil expenditure, people often make the assumption it's based on only what the taxpayer allocation is for services for students in Bethel. But it's really actually a little bit beyond that. It not only includes what the local allocation is, but it also includes all grants to the district and all in-kind services from the town. And I know there's a lot of parents listening in on this call. And so I really wanted to emphasize that things like utilities, insurance, and the dollar amounts listed on this particular chart were from last school year. So I want to just be clear, this is not what the town has set aside or allocated for next school year. It's based on last school year. But our school resource officers, both of those positions are actually funded through the town budget. Our grounds and building maintenance, our 460, all of that total in-kind service is, as well as our local allocation and grants, is what makes up that per pupil expenditure. You'll see that Bethel trends far below the state in terms of what the average per pupil expenditure is across the state. But the other thing that is in the town side of the budget, I know I'm preaching to the choir when talking to the Board of Selectmen and Board of Finance, is the debt service. So a few years ago, the taxpayers of Bethel voted to renovate as new 2 schools, which are almost done, and they are beautiful. And that debt service is actually coming on this year. And so this is not for next year's debt service, but debt service in the prior year. So I just wanted people to kind of understand those pieces too. No?
And this next slide shows DIRG spending. And DIRG means District Reference Group, and we are in DIRG D, and that is a designation for like towns that have comparable demographics, household income. So this is the D schools, and you can see that Bethel, I believe, is one of the few, if only, Fairfield County towns in DIRG D. Am I correct, Dr. Carver?
New Milford is, I
New
believe.
Milford, okay. Well, they're in Litchfield County.
Oh, they are, you're right.
Okay, so I don't know that there are any Fairfield County towns there. You can see that what our placement in the bottom, third or so, quarter or third of those towns. And again, this is 2018, 2019. These numbers do lag behind a couple of years. We try to give you the most current information that is available to us. Next. And then we have regional spending. So these are the towns around us. And so you can see the state. And you can see Bethel just ahead of Danbury in spending. And again, regional spending 2018, 2019. And now we're going to talk about the Board of Education's proposed 2021-2022 education budget. And we have a pie chart, so we can see that largely our costs are for our human resources, salaries at 66.5%, benefits at 19.1%, so roughly 85% to support our human resources. The rest are smaller, obviously, other purchase services, 8.9%, and purchase professional services, 2.1%. The others, small parts of our pie. Next. So in order to maintain our current programs and services, our proposal for our operating budget is $49,450,088, an increase of $1.480,281, or a 3.09% increase over last year. And broken down by category, salaries, benefits, small amount toward regular transportation, no increase in non-personnel special education, and some minor reductions in costs over prior years. The next slide is going to show that in a little bit more detail.
So this is just a summary by object code, which both the Board of Selectmen and Board of Finance have, that provides the breakdown and where you see it in terms of salaries and benefits. It's kind of a repeat of the previous slide. The biggest impact to maintain all of our current services is in salaries and benefits. Everything else was either flat or we tried to reduce it. So to be able to keep our cost structures flat, with the exception of salaries and benefits. So this is just an overview of that. And then I'm going to stop sharing my screen because Mr. Manfreda, typically we stop after the 450 and talk about that before we get into the 460. Is that how you'd like to, or Matt, either one of you?
I see some hands up already, so why don't we have some questions if you're okay with that, Matt?
Yeah. just saying the same thing.
Okay, Brian, I see your hand up first.
Okay. Just a few questions. When you talk about the $1 million grant that you're going to use to add the personnel,
Mhm.
that's on top of the 3% increase that you're
That's
discussing.
correct.
So in 2 years, if that grant runs out, conceivably, we have a 2% increase built in to our budget, correct?
No, I wouldn't say that. I
Okay.
think we would do what we always do, which is after the 2-year time frame, we'd reassess, and one of, I think, 3 things would happen. It could be that we reallocate an FTE, which we do all the time, if we think we continue to have the needs. Second, we address the needs and we don't need those positions anymore. And we have a strategy about how to hire people without ending up having to lay people off, which I won't get into the weeds right now, but that's the other piece. But third, if you're right, if we do reassess it at that point and say, yeah, we still need that, or we still need that special ed teacher. I'm just using that as an example. Then we would have, then yes, we would include it in the budgetary process at that time. But we specifically did it so that we use the grant over the longest periods of times that we could, so that if we got to that point, we wouldn't see any type of impact immediately. Does that make sense?
It does. I mean, I just, I do a lot with grants, so I just know sometimes when we get to the end of a grant, and I'm not questioning your needs for the positions, just my real question is there a contingency where, hey, the government says we're done with this COVID grant, COVID's in our rearview mirror. Is there a way, I guess, are there other things that it could be spent on that? I know you can't supplant funds and things along those lines, but is there another way to spend the money so the impact isn't as great in year 2? Like, do you phase it in next year and use part of the grant for something else, or how are you going to do it to lessen the blow, I guess, is my biggest question in the future? Because let's be honest, chances are, these positions are going to be needed for quite some time, right? I mean, kids always have problems in math. I mean, that's to be expected. Kids, are facing anxiety and pressures that we never did. So I'm just questioning, how do we minimize the effect in year 2? Because I remember when we did switch to full day kindergarten, remember we did that on a grant, and we started in an arrear. So I guess that's just my only question. That I appreciated the presentation.
Yeah. And I mean, I think unfortunately, and Terry, you can jump in too. I think unfortunately our biggest problem, Brian, is that a lot of what we need is people to work with kids. And we need people to provide those interventions. We need them to support students with disabilities, right? We can't necessarily use other things to provide that relief, which is the purpose of that grant. We are making sure that we're using part of that funding for other stuff too, right? Not only short-term programs that are less impactful in terms of staffing, but also things like PPE, right, Terry, and cleaning and all of those different things, so that we're mitigating the impact.
What's the salary impact on what we're using the grant for? How much is going towards salaries? And how much is going towards other stuff? That would
So over the 2 years, I anticipated that question. So over the 2 years, right now, these are very, very rough numbers. Okay, we're anticipating about 780,000 over the 2 years in salaries. So if you divide that in half.
So is the total increase in salaries 780 divided by 2, or
Yes.
is it?
Correct. And that includes benefits.
So the actual numbers come out to like, and I don't have a calculator. 390.
390.
So that's the real increase over the 2 years, is 390,000 in salaries.
If after the completion of 2 years, correct. So it would be for 2021, 2022, and then 2022, 2023. Right.
But in 2024, and I'm just speaking rough numbers, The
Right.
real impact to the budget is 400,000 if you kept all those.
If we kept them all, correct. You're not wrong.
Okay,
Again, I don't view it the same way, but we can debate.
that's just the way
that.
my brain works. I'm sorry.
Yes. And then we say about 300, I'm rounding up here. So 270,000 roughly for other stuff. And that some of that it will be salaries because it'll be things for like before and after school programs, possibly tutors, those things. But the majority of that we're trying to put aside for cleaning, PPE, right, Terry?
Mhm.
Those kinds of things.
Well, I appreciate it. I'm gonna mute myself because I'm sure people are tired of hearing me talk, so.
And well, I'd like to add though, Brian, we've had these discussions.
Right.
I mean, we understand that there's a possibility that some or all of these positions are temporary. The government has asked us to use the money to recover academically. So the focus has to be that way. But again, we've had discussions as to, well, where does the enrollment roll through in 2 years, and what possibilities are there for you've seen us reallocate back when you were on the Board of Ed, the whole reallocation of our resources. So
I guess it's just a different
guarantee-
way of looking at it,
Yeah.
you know.
Can't
For me, I would
guarantee
rather
you-
see the salaries in the budget so we know what we're voting on, right? And it's just a different way of presenting it. To me, I'd like to see the salaries in the budget so everyone knows, okay, this is what we're really looking at, whether it's 400,000 added into salaries, and then, you use that money for stuff that maybe is 1 or 2 time purchases to get through COVID. So your budget isn't like inflating and deflating. That's just my personal opinion. However the Board of Ed decided to do it, that's fine.
Okay.
Nick, I think you had your hand up next.
Okay, thank you. Doctor, we talked about the grant money and those are new hires. With the 1.86, I think was the salary increase. Was there any new employees in that budget?
Just that one technology person that I told you when I was on the technology slides.
Okay, there was a lot.
Yeah,
of material.
I know. I purposely put, because I didn't want people to get confused. It said operational budget. The only change on the board side for was to Brian's point. We don't see that problem going away, and that's a position that we think long term is going to be necessary.
So the biggest part, I think it was 66% or something like that, is one person besides any contractual
Correct.
salary.
Right, and that position is certainly not. I think we budgeted 51 or 55,000. Correct.
Yeah, plus benefits. Yeah.
Plus benefits.
Yeah.
Right.
For the technology person.
Just for a second, Nick, I had a follow-up question for that. Before we lose the thread, I wanted to just ask you, Dr. Carver, Terry, I'm looking at the detailed budget proposal, and it looks like it says there's 1.5 FTE increases.
Yes, so let me explain that. Part of it was we had a position for years that we could not fill. It was called a BCBA, oh my gosh, behavior, Terry.
Board certified behavioral analyst.
And we were paying an agency a very astronomical amount of money to provide that service for the district. And so that's part of the reason why there was an adjustment, so that it didn't increase. What happened is it was an adjustment from a contracted services line into salaries. Am I wrong, Terry?
That's correct. And that happened during this year.
Yes.
So we did finally fill
We
fill a
filled
spot
the
that was
position.
had been advertised for,
As long as I've been in Bethel.
yeah, a
I mean,
long
it's
time.
for
Long
7
time.
years. It's a
But we
very,
did reduce the contracted services
Services.
line to do that. The other thing that happens, Bob, is it's not perfect. We pay for teaching of extra sections of classes, and there is some rounding that happens. So that's why it shows as 1.5. Some rounding went down, and then that BCBA was hired during this year. So
Right.
that's why you're seeing a net effect of a 0.5 in there.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, Nick, it just kind of That
No,
carried
it was
on
a
from
it's a really good question, and I forgot to mention it, and I'm glad you brought it up.
No, it was a great question, Bob. I really have nothing else except I appreciate your time that you guys put in, the Board of Ed and all you guys there at the schools. It's just, it comes down to the ability of the people to pay. I mean, you guys are struggling as kids. How do you think the parents are feeling? So that's all. We'll get into that all later. So, but I appreciate your time.
Cynthia, you look like you had your hand up next.
Yeah, I have my hand up. So, we go through this every year. I'm probably I'm going to say a few things that probably I'm going to get filleted on Facebook. So I'm just going to brace myself. First, I'll say the good things is that I really think that you work really hard. I think that you put that budget together with all, your heart and soul, and that, but I'm having a problem with a couple of things. One is it's sort of the tail end of what Nick said, that it just astounds me that, and I have no control over salaries, but it kind of astounds me that in the face of people losing their jobs, the very people who are the parents of the children who now have an increased subsidized lunch number, and that we're increasing the taxes to the very people who have children who are qualifying for the subsidized lunch. Okay, that's just a problem for me. I have no control of your salaries. However, it doesn't jibe with we're all in this together when I see that like a 9% increase in a salary of a non-union employee. It just doesn't square with me. It's amazing to me that the unions, that there was no, and I'm sure your negotiations were, there was some flexibility, but it just defies common sense or belief, or we're in this together, to think that there's no consideration in there for what everyone in the country is going through. I'm not going to, soapbox, but I will say this. I do have an actual specific question, which is, what part of that, was it the first ESSER went to St. Mary's School?
So it's determined by Title I. And actually, Terry, you can explain this better. It was about $10,000.
Originally.
Right. And then we were told that we didn't actually have to give them any, but they had already spent the money. So we did give them that proportion of amount of money. I will say for St. Mary's, and I've already told Principal Smith this, in this latest round of stimulus money that came from the federal government, there's a significant pot of money at the state level for non-public schools. So St. Mary's would be eligible to apply for those funds. But it's based off the same percentage, because we give them a portion of our Title I funds also. But it's obviously much smaller because they don't have as many students who qualify for those programs. So they look at your free and reduced lunch rates to proportion off how much the school district will have, and then how much St. Mary's would get based on those numbers.
Okay, so this grant, they got about 10,000 is what you're saying.
Well, Cynthia, if you would, I want to clarify for you. So originally the grant was calculated based on the Title I calculations, and it was it came out to be a little over $10,000. We did the calculation. Dr. Brooks informed St. Mary's of how much they would receive. And then I'll be very straight with you. Politics beyond our control got into the middle of the whole thing. So one day we would get a letter from the state saying that they were disagreeing with the federal mandate that St. Mary's get the money. And they would say to us, well, don't give it to them yet. And then the next day they would say, it was overruled, they can have the money. And then this went back and forth at least 4 times. In our heart of hearts, we were happy to have St. Mary's get the money. So pretty much we were hoping that they were going out and spending it. Because at the end of the day, they said, no, you don't have to give any of the money to the non-public schools But if they have already expended it, you can hold that obligation. And so Dr. Brooks called them right away to find out, what have you spent? And they had spent about $6,500 of it. And we said, okay, we're going to make the number be exactly what you spent. And we are going to send you that money because that is what we are allowed to send you.
Got it.
We were disappointed in the state and federal levels when it came to this.
Those politics, you know.
Yeah, but in the new ESSER grant though, Cynthia, they would not, that is allocated to the school district, and they have a separate pot that they can apply for COVID relief.
You know, what's interesting is the reason that question was prompted in my brain was because your letter that what you sent to the Board of Finance said that you received it and that St. Mary's got a portion. And now I realize why the number wasn't in there, because it was too convoluted to put in a letter. So I get it now. There's something else that's a little bit, well, two questions. One is about the math intervention. Now, was it a couple years ago that you got some math interventionists? And it seems, what I want to know is what was the fruit of that over the time you had it until COVID?
It was very successing. In fact, it was in my budget presentation last year to the U.
Right.
So I can resurrect it and send it to you because it was very successful. We were moving kids out of intervention, doing I thought a really great job. Our math scores have gone up over time, and then it's like we hit a huge speed bump. So it definitely had some positive impacts. If you want, I can resend you guys the presentation from last year because it had very specific information in there.
Yeah, I mean, it was just curious because now, you know, you're kind of back in square one in a weird way, you know, with the percentages, and that's sad. But the other thing is, I share Brian's concerns, and you know, you explained that very well about the FTEs and everything. There's something though that bothers me, and it's we have a little more control about this, but not really. That maybe some of those funds might be spent towards empowering the parents of these children, because it seems to me in my tiny dinosaur mind that everything, you know, the kids, but these kids have parents. So I'm not saying the parents aren't doing a good job. I'm saying maybe some parents don't even know how to do a good job. And I'm not saying it's up to you to educate them, but maybe there's some room in these grants for some empowerment of parents whose children are suffering from this fallout. So, and again, I don't know your families there. I don't know the students. I couldn't possibly. So I'm just throwing that out there only because I see it that the school has in many ways more and more over time, and especially now during this crazy crisis, that, you know, kind of assuming so much of responsibility for the child's well-being, and that's not bad. It's just it seems to me a little bit lopsided. So I'm just going to put that out there, and I could ask the question: is there any consideration in those funds to be thought about for what I'm talking about?
The answer is yes. So if you look at the, and I know I sent it to all of the Board of Finance and Selectmen, there was one of the ways that you can do is to support families. So the question really is, well, what can the school do to provide that support? What is needed? So I guess I'm not saying it's not out of the realm to provide different types of services and programs. I think what we have to do is identify what those needs actually are.
But wouldn't it make sense, and correct me if I'm way off base here, but wouldn't it make sense that if you're having the socio-emotional counseling, and it would be for a family rather than exclusively for a student, because it just seems like what's happening now is much more of a ecosystemic problem, and that it could, you know, bring people to common ground. And you know, it's just the way I think. That's all.
Okay.
Do you have any interest or plans for that?
We haven't even had that conversation yet. But it is a component that we have to discuss. Because it's one of the ways that you can, it's one of the areas that you could potentially use the grant funding for. So we haven't, so I have nothing specific that I can tell you right now.
But I hope you consider it. I really do.
Yeah.
Okay, that's all I got.
And for years, we've had the family school partnership. And there are, you know, ways that the district has done outreach to families. And so I'm sure Dr. Carver and Dr. Brooks will have some thoughts on how to enhance that a bit.
Respectfully, enhance it a bit. I mean, this is like family partnership, you know, to the third power. This is amazingly different.
Here's what I would say. I feel the school district has gone above and beyond during this crisis to support families. You know, we've provided them breakfast and lunches 6 days a week. We've made sure that they have the right technology in their homes and that it's working functionally appropriate so that kids can be successful in distance learning. If a child has an academic need and a parent has them on distance learning or is in a hybrid situation, we make sure that we provide extra support to support those families. So I wouldn't say we're ignoring families. I think we're providing incredible services above and beyond. We're grocery shopping for them when they don't have food and they have to quarantine. So I think that but I think the bigger question that you're asking is, can some of those grant fundings extend some of that, or are there other untapped needs that parents have that could be addressed through those grant funds?
Not exactly, but I just want to go back to what you just said, that the things that you just listed are very tangible, practical things that do affect, you know, emotions. But like I said, providing the lunches and, you know, providing the technology, some of that is fallout from parents losing their jobs or having to adjust their schedules to do the remote learning. So I'm simply talking about the emotional support that you're proposing, that it would include the family in toto. That's just, you know, but I don't feel like I'm getting that. I know you haven't had the conversation, but I just think that it has to be part of it. Again, I'm not on the Board of Ed. I'm just saying, in order to maximize the funds that we have, try to empower the parents. That's all. That's all I have. Thanks.
Okay. Other Board of Finance members that may have questions? I don't see any. So Dr. Carver, Melanie, Terry, the team, thank you as always. You guys do a great job in presenting, and it is reflective of the great job you do. So I think, Matt, it goes to you and the Board of Select. Do
you want me to show you the 460 or not?
Well, we started questioning on the 450, so why don't we finish?
450, right.
Why don't we finish it and then go to the
okay, sorry.
To the 460. So,
Paul, do you have any questions for Dr. Carver or the staff?
I do.
Yeah, go ahead.
Maybe my question is more for Terry Yansky. Terry, you know, this year guys did a great presentation. I'll tell you, answer a lot of questions for me. But you know, this year under this COVID crisis, school has been off. You've been on and off situations where you know, they're part-time. Sometimes you're in school, sometimes you're not. The current budget, when we're looking towards the end of the fiscal year, what type of savings are there, do you anticipate? Or is it just too early to ask that question?
You know, Paul, you're a little bit early on it, because we did expend the entire CRF, and now I'm making sure that that's all shifted over to the grant to really be able to see what's left in all our accounts. We also were very clear with all of the principals, the administrators this year, that you know, really think about what it is you need to get through the rest of the year and get that encumbered so that we can really earlier than the end of May have a sense of where we stand. But we're not there yet. We're probably
2 months away.
They're probably a month. we're probably a month away from having a better sense of where
Okay.
we are.
Fine, we'll ask you then. But listen, again, I'd like to thank Dr. Carver and you and the Board of Education really for a great presentation here tonight.
So I think if we go to the 460, that we've been at this for about an hour and a half. Do you think the 460 is going to go relatively quickly?
Yes. I can just share my screen one more time. Sorry. So basically what we're requesting, it's not, all right, is the same level of funding, or 450,000. There's not been any significant changes. I think the most of it, in terms of our overall purchase orders for contracting services and preventative maintenance contract is the bulk of it. And then the 460D, 406D is some projects that we hope to accomplish over the course of this year. And those are all at middle school, high school, and
Very.
thank you, Carrie. So there's not a lot to talk about there, but we can answer any questions you might have. You have the details in your budget materials.
Any questions from the board? Nick, I think you've got your hand up.
Excellent, thank you. Again, you guys are 3% to $1.5 million, just real round numbers for a guy like me. And then the debt services we're starting to pay for the schools is another $1.5 million. And you guys did let the parents know that the police officers are in the school. It's a couple $100,000 besides the mowing of the fields and all that.
Right.
It's a tremendous amount of an increase for this year. Last year, we asked the question, how much is X left over? No, we're spending money. Well, at the end of the deal, it was $380,000 that we couldn't give back to the taxpayers, but we put back into the 460 account. Okay, so why wouldn't you, with all these increases, say, you know what? Let's knock 200 off of this. We've got that account pretty full. So let's try to give the taxpayers a little bit of a break. That would have looked better for me. Instead of keeping the 380 and then just keeping the number that we keep adding each year. So why do we have any consideration to trying to lessen the blow on the taxpayers?
Well, I'll address that. So there are different accounts. The money that was put in, I'm not disagreeing with you. I just want to go through the pieces. The money that is returned goes into the unexpended funds account. It doesn't go into the 460 account. So they are accounted for very differently on the town side. And if you wanted to talk about that, I think I'd probably have to talk to Mr. Kozlowski about if anything would even be appropriate in terms of one fund used for a different purpose or for a single year. Remember, you would be kind of building in, you'd have to reinstate it the following year. Just, same thing like a grant, you have to reinstate it if the grant goes away. But the accounting wise, I mean, if that's something the Board of Finance wants me to look into, I would meet with Mr. Kozlowski and talk about if there are options, because they are in different buckets.
So the 380, the 382,000, whatever it was, what can you use that money for?
Well, it can be used, there's an MOA with the Board of Finance that explains what it can be used for. I think this is you're asking about something we hadn't really gone in depth about. So I think we'd have to look back at where the allowable uses of funds. And I'd have to go over that with the town controller, because they are both in town accounts, and make sure that we're not doing anything untoward in terms of the use of the funds. That's all. I'm not disagreeing. I'm saying I'd have to.
So the money that was.
So the unexpended funds account.
So can you get that information again?
Yes, you had that
You have
information
it.
last fall. We gave you what was written up about how those funds could be used. It's defined as emergencies and opportunities. So, if it could fall into that, then it may be a possibility. I'm just saying they're not in the same bucket. So we would definitely have to go back and make sure that with each fund that's been established, that we're adhering to the parameters of the fund.
So during the pandemic, because this is probably not going to happen for another 100 years, we hope.
Let's hope.
This would be an emergency thing. So what are we saving this money for? Can't we use some of it for these emergencies, PPP money and all that? Or the
I think what Terry's saying to you is that we're open to going and talking about it, Nick. And I think that what we would have to just talk about is, so that money, and it's on our district dashboard, on our financial dashboard. So if anybody from the public wants to see how that money's been spent over time. So emergencies, like when we had a suddenler, I think we paid for the chillers out of that account at the middle school, right? The chillers just died. So we went to that fund. It was an emergency. And we were able to use that to pay for it. So it didn't hit the town at all. Another example in terms of opportunities that we've used the money for is we got a security grant a few years ago, and we could only get that grant if we paid a proportion of that, the expense. I can't remember how much it was. So we used that grant as an opportunity because we wouldn't have gotten that money for security unless we had that pot of money to go to. So that's an example of an opportunity. So the MOA between the Board of Ed and actually the Board of Finance, which you have, is very specific about how you can use the money. And so I think what Terry's just saying is we just would need to talk about that with Bob Kozlowski and probably Bob and Frida about how do you define that, in terms of emergency, what are we talking about?
Look, Nick, I think it's a great idea. And I think we need to consider it, given the pressures, it's another lever that we can use. So yeah, Terry talked to Bob Kay. My reading of it is it gives us the opportunity, it allows us to use it for that purpose. So, but let's all agree to that. And if we need to pull that lever, we know it's available to us.
Thank you.
Yeah. Brian, I think you're up now.
Dr. Carter, just a quick question. Other than what you have in here for repairs and whatnot, do you anticipate any large capital needs this year or next year?
So the only thing that I'm worried about is,
Two things.
is that couple of HVAC units at the high school. They're like with a wish and a prayer every year. But we all light candles. So that's the only thing that I'm a little bit worried about. But other than that, there's nothing that we feel is critical for next year. But know that could be a problem.
Could any of the COVID money go towards the HVAC if you need to replace them?
No. We've already explored it.
Because that would be full replacement of a unit that broke, not an improvement of ventilation, an enhancement to ventilation. So
I would like to chime in on that. Brian, the HVAC units are on our radar, and I plan to put a proposal in front of the selectmen, then on to you guys within the next couple of weeks to use current year capital non-recurring for that, because that's got to get done before the next school year.
But other than that, that was the big thing.
All right, thank you.
I'm sorry, Dr. Carter, I may not have been following. I thought you said there were two things.
Terry,
it's just that there are 2 units that are problematic.
And can you remind us, it's been on the radar screen for a long time.
Oh yeah, they're part of, this is another thing with the renovation from Bethel High School that was never replaced, right, Terry?
Correct, because it was a renovation, not a renovation to new.
So they're from
those units were not touched.
So they're from like 1970.
I don't know. But
and what's the dollar amount again? Just
I couldn't tell you exact dollar.
It's on the capital plan that you have.
Yeah, but they're in the capital. The estimates are in the capital plan.
Right.
But we'd have to go out and get real solid estimates worked up, but we did put placeholders in there for them.
And what's the placeholder number?
I can look while we're talking.
Hey, Bob Kozlowski, do you have that capital plan handy?
Yep, I got it here.
It's at Bethel High School, obviously.
HVAC for the high school is 325,000.
For one, yeah.
And then Bethel Middle School is 795,000.
But it's the high school one that's the issue.
Is that
So
just
that's
one unit at the time?
325. That's 325.
Well, we only showed one. We figured maybe we could address one per year, but there are two that are problematic. I don't think we put a number in for the second year.
Okay. Well, I would, we're kind of diverging here, but I would ask that you tighten up that number and get a fresh estimate, because I do want to move forward with that.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Any other questions from the Board of Finance? I don't, hold on, there's two screens. No, I don't see any. So Matt, no further questions from the Board of Finance.
Okay, Paul?
No, that's it. I think the presentation was excellent. I think we have a pretty good handle. I think the questions as posed by Nick were valid, especially for this particular budget. And I think Bob Manfreda said that they were going to address that. So I'm happy to where we are right now. Let's just go into more deliberations. That's it.
Okay. No further questions, Your Honor.
Okay. good.
Can I
Thank
just
you.
update that the middle school is only 50,000. I was looking at the turf field.
Yeah.
I had the wrong line.
That didn't make sense to
I
me.
had the wrong line.
Bob, we'll have to get you some better numbers on both of those units and then
All right.
see what we can go
Okay.
forward with.
Again, Dr. Carver, Terry, Melanie, the team, thank you very much. It's always a very helpful, very crisp presentation. So thank you.
Thank you.
Good job,
Thank you.
everybody. Nicely done.
When do you start deliberating? Just so we know.
Next
Week
week.
from tonight.
The 9th?
I don't have the master schedule in front of me, but I think that I am scheduled to present to the board. The Board of Selectmen is supposed to deliberate, I think, a week from tonight, and then present the following night to the Board of Finance. Do you have that in front of you, Bob? Is that-
Yeah, your
So-
first selectman presents to the Board of Selectmen on the 23rd. So that's point just about a week from today. And then Matt will present as a representative of the Board of Selectmen to the Board of Finance on March 2nd.
But does the Board of Selectmen have a night of deliberations?
You said the 21st, Matt?
I thought,
That's
23rd.
I'll have to get back to you, because I don't have that schedule in front of me. That's pinned to my office wall.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, we haven't set that schedule. There's plenty of time for deliberations before that occurs.
23rd.
The 23rd.
23rd.
Okay, because if you're deliberating, we'd like to be there, because if questions come up, we'd like to be able to get you the answers.
Sure. Oh, well, we won't let you miss that one. Absolutely.
I want to thank you all for your time, all the parents and staff members that are on the call, and the Board of Selectmen and Board of Finance. We just appreciate you listening to us, and we understand that it's a complex year with complex needs, and I think none of us want to be here. This is going to take years to get out of, and so it's a long haul and a process, and we just appreciate the time that you gave us.
Did a very good job.
And I second that.
Thank you. Very good job.
Thank you for your time. Yes.
All right. Well, I will entertain, Paul, you want to make a motion to adjourn?
I'll make the motion to adjourn tonight.
And I'll second. Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We are adjourned. Bob?
Entertain a motion from the Board of Finance to adjourn.
How about I make a motion to adjourn?
A second.
Second.
All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned as well. Thank you.
All right. Have a
Thank
good
you
night,
very much.
everybody.
Thank you.
Good night, all.
Good night.
Thank you. Good
Good night. Be safe.